Hey, what's up everyone? Darkwing Dad here, bringing you a Father's Day edition of a recent 3D build I literally just completed. So today we're going to be doing the Loki crown from the new Disney Plus Loki series. It's the smaller crown. We've seen snippets and pieces of it. We've seen the female crown. We've seen that little preview trailer where Loki wears it. Don't know exactly when it's coming out, but we know it's there, so I figured I'd build it. So in today's build, I'm going to go over some cool steps I got to get the crown nice and smooth. It's not a super intricate piece, but it still needed some preparation and smoothing and sanding and yada yada. I'll go over all that. But what we're going to do is get into how I oriented the piece, how I prepped it, got it all smooth, got it ready for paint, and then we're going to be showing you how I use rub and buff on this piece to give it that nice aged, weathered look. So without any further ado, check it out. So I positioned the horn with the curved part to the bed because that was the quickest and it saved the most supports, but it chopped up the print a little bit. But I went ahead and sanded it with 80 grit sandpaper and then put some Bondo plastic metal over it, sanded that with 120 and 180, and then put a light coat of glazing putty on top of that, and then sanded that with 220, and it was pretty much completely back to normal. After that, I sanded the whole horn with 120 and 180, and then proceeded to my Bondo filler primer. All right, so here is the crown, the main part of it, and cleaned up pretty good. Printed it at a 0.16 layer height. I used the freebie Creality filament, so it's kind of splotchy in some areas. I always get wish-washy results with the Creality. I don't know why I use it. I was just like, I'll use it for this. I said a 0.16 layer height. I printed it at 50 millimeters per second, and I printed it exactly how you see it. So it was just on the build plate like that. So it generated some minor supports up in here, a little bit on the inside. I do have to clean up the inside a little bit, but printed pretty clean. I did try printing it like this, and it actually failed right here. So I had to restart it. So orientation wise, printing it like that is pretty much the best way. I don't really think doing it that way would benefit anything. I think just like this, and you're gonna have a couple supports that are generated here, but overall it's not too bad. At a 0.16, it took, I believe it was 14 hours to print this. With my speed and layer height, so wasn't too bad. But like I said, minimal sanding, shouldn't take me too long, so we'll get this sanded and knocked out. I'm gonna fix up the other horn as well, and then I'll have you guys take a look at how she looks before paint. So really one of the only downsides to using white filament is when it's printed, you can't really see how good or bad the PLA lines are. So it was essentially a pretty good print, but there were some areas where they were just like, see these thicker lines right there? So what I just did just to speed up that process is basically just take glazing putty, and the best thing to do, the easiest way to do it on something like this, basically just take it and just kind of smear it in that crevice. I obviously did this with the whole helmet here, and what you want to do is just kind of spread it out. And this will sand down really easy. You don't want to put it on too thick, but if you do put it on a little bit thicker, just give it more time to dry. It'll all sand down. This isn't like body filler. You really don't need to put this on thick. It dries quick, so it kind of seems like it's thick, but it really isn't. It sands down really super easy. So I really should have had my tripod for this, but that's okay. It's in the room. And really what you want to do is, it's just a lot easier just to do it with, just throw a glove on and just spread it on the whole mask. If you try to do it with like a spreader or something, it's just going to take forever. So, but you can see I got it pretty adequately spread on here. I'm not super worried about these because the horns will cover that. And the ends I'm not really worried about because they sanded down pretty easy. Any straight edge sands down really good, but I'm just gonna get a little bit more in here. and then I'm going to sand this whole thing down with 320. This really does speed up the process. Don't think you're creating more work for yourself. You're probably eliminating 2 to 3, I'd say 2 rounds of filler priming and then sanding just by doing this. So by doing this, we'll sand it, and then I'll be able to do 2 to 3 coats of filler primer, sand it, and it should be done. So let me get this little area here. We're gonna let it dry for about an hour, and then we're gonna sand it and see how it looks. So here's the crown after sanding, all done by hand. And again, I used 220 grit sandpaper. Big thing to emphasize on is you don't need heavy grit sandpaper to knock down glazing putty. It's super easy, and you want the glazing putty to fill in those defects. So if you go too heavy, 180, 120, you're gonna delete all your work. So 220, it only took about 15-20 minutes to actually sand this down. I then went on to the one horn, and this is basically after I sanded the whole horn with 120 and 180. I did 2 coats of filler primer, and then I sanded it with 220. You can see how the filler primer is filling in those lines there. It's making everything nice and smooth. So after that was all pretty smooth and nice and prepped, I did 2 more coats of filler primer and then sanded it with 320. That's how the horn looks right there. So you can see this thing is very smooth, almost 100%, filled in pretty much all the remaining PLA lines. And again, that's because I printed it at such a nice layer height and was able to do some adequate sanding, and the filler primer is doing its job as well. After the crown was sanded and wiped down, I did 2 to 3 coats of Bondo filler primer. So you can see here, the crown is looking very smooth, very nice. I would then resand this whole crown with 320. Again, we don't want to use the same sandpaper because we don't want to delete all of our work. So going up to 320 basically allows us to allow the filler primer to fill in those lines. And here's how that crown looks after sanding with 320. You can see we're going to have to put a little bit more primer on because those edges got stripped off, but overall it is incredibly smooth. It's getting there. It just basically needs 1 or 2 more steps, and it is completely ready for paint. So what we do is we basically just have to reprime it for those areas that got knocked down. So you can see me doing that right here, just putting a little bit of Bondo filler primer on, just to put on what we might have taken away too much on edges and things like that. Now I did repeat this process one more time with the horns on, and you'll see here, you can see some of the areas under the horns. I elevated it, some of the edges and things, just to get some of the areas that didn't have any primer on it. Obviously, we're going to put paint on this, so we want to make sure that there is primer on everything. So I basically just positioned the crown up just to make sure we got everything, and then, of course, flipped the crown around just to get the back areas and everything, because everything's going to have paint on it. So my last step in this process is basically sanding the whole thing with 400 grit sandpaper. Now the reason I do that is because sometimes when you use primers, and depending on how you tilt the can, sometimes you get overspray or a little bit of like roughness on the edge, and we don't want that to bleed through the paint. So I knew I had enough primer on here, so I went and just did a 400 grit sand on everything just to make sure it was all nice and smooth and clean and uniform, and it was prepped for our rub and buff. All right, so now we move on to the rub and buff. So the whole thing was sanded with 400, and we wiped it all down just to make sure everything was nice and clean and uniform. The piece looks great. I got in all the little intricate areas there, and like I said, everything looks nice and uniform and good to go. So we're going to be using rub and buff, and I was considering either using their darker or their gold leaf. And I went with the gold leaf because I knew I had a darker underlay, and it would probably bleed through a little bit. So if I use the darker one, it might not look good. So I went with the gold leaf just to make sure it looked great. Now, when you apply the rub and buff, you definitely want to wear gloves. 1, because that's one way you can apply it, but 2, you're going to get it all over your hands anyways. You'll need a microfiber towel, obviously, to apply it and to buff it down. And a glove, on the other hand, is also something that you might want to do as well. So what I like to do is cut a small piece of the microfiber and just use that versus the whole towel. That way you know how much product you need or don't need, and you're not chasing the towel. But these tubes come sealed, so you'll have to puncture the top. And basically what you're going to do is just squeeze a little bit on the towel. You don't need a ton. This stuff goes a very long way. So just put a little bit on the towel. And if you're not sure of your color, like what your color is going to be or how it would look, always try it on inconspicuous spots. So what I'm actually doing here is I'm spreading it on the towel, and I'm not sure how this is gonna look yet. So what I did is I actually tested it on the inside of the helmet. So that's a little tip. If you're not sure, try the inside of a helmet, try a spot where, you know it won't be seen, and if it looks bad, it's no big deal. The great thing about Rub and Buff is it can be removed with mineral spirits, and mineral spirits will not damage clear coat. It will not damage primer. It's just a solvent that'll help strip away the Rub and Buff in case if you don't like it or you want to do a different color. But you can see right here that it's applying very nicely, and it's actually the perfect color that I wanted. I'm glad I didn't go with the darker one because I think it would have looked too dark, almost bronze. With this black base coat, it's actually kind of leaching through a little bit and really giving that weathered look that I was going for. Now, if you need to blend or buff, so to speak, time is of the essence. So this stuff does dry pretty quick, and that's why I have a spare towel. You can see, always want to work in a small section, and I basically grab the towel and I use the nappy end, which is the non-fluffier side of the towel, and I'm just kind of rubbing over, applying a little bit of pressure, and you can actually see that it's not only removing some of the product, but it's actually spreading it out. So big thing with Rub and Buff, do not do large areas, do smaller sections of a time. That way, if you need to go back and kind of level or spread some out, you're not chasing the whole helmet. If you put it on the whole helmet and then come back, it just creates more work. It's easily fixable, but you always want to just do smaller areas. I like to apply it in a circular motion and then just kind of come through and just kind of blend and buff it all in. So you can see I'm just going to do this small little section here and basically blend it all in and then come through and buff it down and level it all off at the end. So once the rub and buff is fully applied, you can go through and do your touch-ups. And that's just if you have some areas that aren't as uniform, and maybe you have dark spots that just need to be blended in. That's all I'm doing here. So depending on the shape of what you're blending in, you may have to do either, like a vertical blending top to bottom, or maybe a left to right, or in the center here, you can see I'm doing more of a circular motion. You'll know if you're applying too much or too little because you'll kind of see the pattern that the towel is going. You'll know you have just the right amount when everything just kind of blends in and all looks uniform. Finished piece. This is the Loki crown, and it is nice and aged and weathered. I think it's overall a perfect look for this crown, but I think ultimately this is exactly how Loki would want his crown to look. It's nice and smooth. All the steps I took in preparation in getting it nice and uniformed, got rid of all those PLA lines. The black base with the rub and buff was absolutely perfect. So I highly recommend using rub and buff if you're wanting that aged and weathered look. There's a little bit of a learning curve there. There's some trials and tribulations, but the great thing with it is, like I mentioned in the video, if you do something wrong, it's very easy just to kind of massage it back in and just re-go over the piece. It's not like with painting where you have to completely strip it off and do the whole thing. You can actually just wipe it off with mineral spirits, or you can just basically apply more and just kind of massage it in. But overall, I'm really digging the way this crown came out. I think it looks absolutely awesome. It is a display piece, so it is just going to go up in the Marvel room, but you know, even if you were to wear it, it's a little bit big. So this is printed at 100 and a little bit large, so we'd have to scale it down a bit to wear it, but I'm just going to put this up on display regardless, so I wasn't really worried about size, but might want to scale it down to like 96 or 97 if you got a small dome like me. Other than that, it came out awesome. Let me know what you guys think. I want to thank all you guys who are subscribed to the channel. I appreciate your feedback, your comments, and your support. We are on the push towards 1,000, so once we get to 1,000, fun things happen. Maybe I give crowns like this away. I don't know. We'll see. But I want to thank each and every one of you. Make sure you leave me a comment on this page if you have any questions on the video, anything that was used or anything like that. I will be sure to comment. If you're not a subscriber and you enjoy all things 3D printing and cosplay and Disney, and maybe you have goofy kids like me, click that subscribe button and be sure to subscribe to the channel because there's a lot more great things coming ahead. But that's pretty much it, guys. That's it for this edition of Darkwing Dad, the Loki crown. Again, I'll give you one more look at it here. But that's a wrap on the Loki crown. So again, if you guys have any questions on how I did anything or certain products used, feel free to leave me a comment. That way, if you want to make a crown like this, or maybe the old school crown with the big horns, or the new lady crown, if you want to make any of those, you want it to look like this, use those exact products, you get these exact results. That's it, guys. I'm going to go enjoy Father's Day. All the dads watching, I hope you have a great and happy Father's Day. And until next time, I'll see you then, guys. Enjoy these last shots of the helmet. Later.